The world can be a grim, dark place, an eerie existence haunted by horrors beyond imagination. Time marches side by side with the world, causing things to be lost or permanently changed. Beneath the surface of forgotten indie games and strange internet nostalgia, there exists a story far more unsettling than it first appears. A place that slipped out of the public eye since its brief surge of popularity back in 2014. A weathered world featuring a small green frog, a lake so deep it covers a forgotten flooded forest, and a trespassing menace intent on erasing our little froggy and his fellow froggy friends from existence. A closer look at what unfolds when an outside invader threatens to consume and corrupt a once balanced ecosystem. This world I'm describing comes from the game They Breathe, created by The Working Parts, which is a small indie studio team based out of Gothenburg, Sweden. Originally released on December 6th, 2011, this small indie game drifted quietly beneath the surface of the indie scene, before resurfacing years later in 2014, when major YouTube creators such as Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, and the Game Grumps introduced its strange and unsettling world to millions of viewers. At first glance, They Breathe appears deceptively simple. A small green frog navigating a flooded forest, choked with darkness and decay. Yet beneath the murky water lies something deeply unnatural. Broken tree limbs, debris, vines, and leaves creepily drift through the environment. Twisted, gelatinous abominations swim through the water, seeking to assimilate the creatures from above, transforming them into bloated, gasping horrors whose lungs have been harvested for these beings to use for their own selfish survival. Every descent into the water feels claustrophobic, depressing, wrong, as though the ecosystem itself is slowly suffocating under the weight of this hidden corruption. Though the game once held a notable place in early indie horror, it has since faded into the dark recesses of internet history as time has marched forward, overshadowed as wave after wave of newer horror titles came and went. But dear viewers, it's time we return to that flooded forest and uncover the horrific tragedy unfolding within They Breathe. The game begins with our little froggy friend, who I'll nickname Mr. Frog for simplicity's sake, and totally not because I've been binge watching Smiling Friends lately. Good show, by the way. Anyways, Mr. Frog sits alone atop a small branch, his face completely devoid of happiness. It's as if he understands that his home has become fractured and ruined, but even worse, he seems to realize he may be the last frog left alive, isolated, with no one left to comfort him or share in his burdens. Ready to seek answers, our tiny green survivor takes a leap into the murky abyss once called home, descending towards the horrors lurking beneath the water's surface. The game's environment is split into 3 distinct regions, which I've labeled as the Shallows, the Forest, and the Abyss. The Shallows is the shortest of the 3 areas, featuring a cold blue backdrop with the tops of drowned trees barely visible at its deepest points. Small bits of debris drift through the water alongside tiny floating air bubbles, but everything has almost an eerie stillness to it. It's here that Mr. Frog encounters his first invader, a grotesque jellyfish-like creature that has consumed one of his fellow frogs, giving it an almost moose-like appearance. It's using this simulated body as a living pair of lungs to process air bubbles for its own survival. By skillfully maneuvering through the water, Mr. Frog causes the creature to eventually run out of air, bringing its monstrous existence to an end. But sadly, these encounters only become more common the deeper he descends. As Mr. Frog continues downward, he discovers several of his froggy friends drowning beneath the water. By pushing them into nearby air bubbles, he can provide them with just enough oxygen to swim back towards safety. It's one of the few hopeful moments in an otherwise bleak world, knowing that you can at least save some of your friends. Eventually, our little green hero reaches the second and the longest layer of the game, the forest. The forest features countless sunken trees, tangled roots, and patches of earth resting at the bottom of the waterlogged landscape. This is where the infection truly begins to reveal itself. Mr. Frog encounters several more of the jelly creatures here, though some appear in a far more natural jellyfish-like state, seemingly before they've managed to assimilate a frog host. These variants are especially dangerous because if given the opportunity, Mr. Frog himself could suffer the same horrific fate as the others. If Mr. Frog is captured, he has a limited time to free himself, an eerie set of musical keys playing in the background as his expression changes to the blank smile like those already assimilated. This section also introduces the desperate challenge of trying to rescue your fellow frogs before they too are devoured by the alien-like threat spreading through the water. Another variant of these jelly beings is encountered here. Its skin a green tint, and it displays much more aggression than its fellow kin. Our froggy friend continues to battle, swimming further and further down as he makes progress. At the very bottom of the forest rests a deep, dark hole leading into the final area of the game. Our journey takes us into the abyss. This region is dark, oppressive, and almost alien in appearance. Strange polyp-like organisms sway back and forth like unnatural tree limbs, seemingly acting as the birthplace of the jelly monsters infecting the pond above. Several of the creatures encountered here possess those same green balloon-like air sacs that release the toxic clouds when ruptured. These variants act as a much more hostile threat in the abyss, being far more aggressive, as if they're protecting whatever lies hidden at the bottom of this pitch-black chasm. As Mr. Frog swims further down, he finally discovers the truth. What has caused all of these problems? A massive multi-limbed creature, the mother, the birther, their creator, rests deep within the darkness surrounded by hundreds of its offspring. Yet the true horror comes from seeing, attached to each of these creatures, the body of a dead frog, forcibly transformed into a makeshift pair of lungs. Hundreds of Mr. Frog's fellow frogs have already been lost to this nightmare. Mr. Frog fights a long and difficult battle, slowly removing the corpses of his fallen companions from the Queen Jelly's body. As each one is freed, the monstrous creature begins swelling larger with trapped air. Eventually, the final corpse gets removed, causing the bloated monstrosity to violently explode. Mr. Frog has won, the invasion stopped, and the complete destruction of his people prevented. With this nightmare finally over, he swims back towards the surface, spending his remaining time with the few survivors he was capable of saving. Okay, so this section of the video will be relatively short, mainly because They Breathe features very simple gameplay mechanics. For the most part, the game functions almost like an auto-scroller, steadily pushing Mr. Frog deeper into the flooded wilderness and only slowing down during combat encounters or moments where another frog needs rescuing. Because the game only contains 2 primary enemy types alongside the final boss, the gameplay could start to feel pretty repetitive if the experience lasted much longer than its roughly 20 to 30 minute runtime. Thankfully, the short length works heavily in the game's favor, preventing the combat from overstaying its welcome. The first enemy type is what I'll call the assimilated, or the moose, purely because of its strange appearance. These creatures have already assimilated a frog, and they rely on incoming air bubbles to survive. This forces the player to essentially play goalie by blocking the bubbles from reaching them until these monsters eventually suffocate. The second enemy type is the jellyfish variant, which behaves much more aggressively and requires the players to essentially lure or bump them into air bubbles, and because they lack that pair of lungs to process the air, it eventually causes the creatures to violently burst apart. And lastly comes the boss. During this fight, the player must get the jellyfish to snatch up the frogs attached to the queen's massive body, and with each one removed, the queen begins to swell larger and larger like the jellyfish variants do. And then once every frog's been detached, the bloated monster finally explodes. It's probably the most complicated part of the game, but even then, it's still relatively simple. And a lot of what this game has going for it is not the gameplay itself, but how it's driven by its atmosphere. Like the jelly monsters we encountered throughout this small frog's tale, twisting the environment around them and corrupting the lives of our little froggy friends, time itself changes everything. Whether it's a video, a fearful thought, feelings of sadness and loss, a breakup, or even a small indie game, time forces things to march onward. Things fade away, memories grow distant, and eventually many are forgotten altogether. But time is not always cruel, just as it was entirely cruel in Mr. Frog's case. Time heals. It allows for renewal, growth, and self-reflection. People change, lakes form, habitats adapt to the changes occurring within them. Even after devastation, life still finds a way to continue forward. And in the case of They Breathe, I didn't want this game to simply fade away into the dark corners of internet history. I still remember watching Markiplier play this game for the first time over a decade ago, and something about it always stuck with me. Maybe it was the atmosphere, the loneliness, the strange tragedy hidden beneath its simple appearance, or maybe just how my mindset was at the time. Whatever the reason, it remained memorable long after so many other indie horror games came and went. I hope you all enjoyed either hearing about this strange little game for the first time, or perhaps being reminded of something you hadn't thought about in years. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed our descent into the world and horrors of They Breathe.